Hi,
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Thank you for joining us. We were just talking about flowers in the sky. That's a perfect way to start this.
Talking about what flowers in the sky. Okay. Wow,
The
that's
compilation.
uh,
That was like an entry point here for Stan and myself back in '88, and just trying to remember the circumstances of why we started into Creation Records in the first place. And I'm guessing it was probably the British music press. The description of the bands was almost as good as some of the bands.
yeah.
And for me it was the House of Love. I came in right around that time the first House of Love came out, the Pink album.
Yeah,
So
and that was same for me, Pete. I was telling Glenn. So I first heard you in 1988. I picked up the Flowers in the Sky. We were just saying that was the fourth CD I ever bought. And I think it was because I had read about or heard House of Love and Primal Scream. And then, as I said, I already messaged you that I'm a big fan, so I'm going to gush from time to time. But "Why Does the Rain" was the song that I fell in love with off that album. I actually just played it for my 13-year-old last night because I told her I was doing this, and she said, "Oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be."
Excellent.
So there's a compliment.
well, one question that I don't think either one of us had written down, but just came to me is how did you feel about that brief period where Relativity in the US licensed some Creation records, including Judges, Juries? Was it a plus to your career in any way? Did it get you a bigger audience here?
I honestly don't know. If I'm honest with you, I don't really know. I'm sure it was all right. I think, yeah, I mean, we were all set to play in New York. And then it all went wrong because it was a promo trip, basically. And there was a problem with the American Musicians Union, because they couldn't believe that we were doing it and not getting any money. Do you know what I mean? It was some sort of weird, and it was just that completely scuppered us for that show. It was us and Edwyn Collins and someone else as well. We were all set to do it. It was all booked and everything. So that kind of messed us up. And then, we also, by the time Judges, Juries came out, we were sort of in a place as a band where we weren't moving forward that much, really, so it probably wasn't that much use to us in the sense that we'd kind of had our moment, I think, maybe artistically and commercially as well, so that was, not the best time for us. I mean, nothing to do with the Relativity, just to do with us,
Right. And with House of Love specifically, they really got a big push when they signed to Polygram in the US, and it felt like they were going to break big, and they never quite did. But that Relativity album came out, the one that was licensed came out right before that. So speaking of Time on Earth, which we both love the album, and it's wonderful, it's warm, it's direct, the songs are concise, and I don't want to use the word simple, but they almost are simple. There's not any fluff there. Can you talk about how this band came together and how this process came together for this album specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's been about just under 5 years since I did an album of original material.
Right.
So I was very aware of, I mean, I play a lot of shows. I play a lot of music. I kind of I sing a lot, I play a lot, I do a lot. So I was kind of very aware of just trying to choose the best 10 songs. I mean, we actually, I think, recorded about 14 for the album, but I write about 30 or 40 songs a year. So I write lots of songs. So it's just trying to let the best ones kind of like rise to the top, and then you do them. And the group, I started playing with Ian, I think after... Yeah, I started playing with Ian on the You Made Me record. He produced that for me and made it with me, and then he got Andy in to play some bass
From Spearman,
which was like jaw-droppingly good. Yeah, and then it was like, and then we kind of evolved into a band from there. And Sean is someone I've known. I mean, I produced the first Rocking Bird single, amazingly. So I knew him from then. I mean, we all knew each other from Camden, and I've known Sean since 1990, I think, 1989, 1990. I've known Alan from the Rocking Birds even longer than that. So I remember bumping into Sean and going, I really want to do some recording with you. I know he had a studio, and we did, so it just worked out really well.
and the experience with Tapet Records has been very good.
With what? To
with
Peter?
your label?
Yeah, they're great. No, they're lovely. They're lovely. They were also very helpful. I mean, I had this conversation earlier on, actually. I think I've got better at sort of taking advice from people or getting feedback from people. I think I used to be very, very, don't know what you call it, stupid, strong-headed, willful. You know, I was very much like, which maybe you have. I mean, it's good when you're in your 20s and it's bad when you're in your 20s. I think now I'm far better at actually asking for people's opinions and not just waiting for some kind of approbation, but actually asking for their opinions, you know. So I played some of the tracks to Gunther, and he was from to Peter, and he was super helpful and super generous, but also, you know, critical, properly critical, proper good listening, where he's like, well, you know what, I don't think that works. And I'm like, what? You know, there's one track on the album, he's like, no, I don't like it. I'm like, okay, well, I won't put it on the album then. You know, I mean, but it's like, I kind of like that. I think it's something I've learned. You know, I used to be very snotty, probably coming from the punk background. I'm like, the idea that anybody from the record company has any opinion is ridiculous. You know, and of course, you know, I mean, of course, McGee had some brilliant opinions on things, you know, but it was done very gently, and the idea that it was not a given that anybody from the record company should have any opinion about anything that the great artist does. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. I think I'm a bit more mature about that now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a wonderful record, and when I reviewed it, I fell back on I don't know why, but to me, something about it that reminds me of Leonard Cohen. But Leonard Cohen in the '80s, where things are very stripped back, and there's warmth and there's a little bit of wit, but of course his worldview seems to be a lot more downbeat, dour than yours is. But now let me ask you specifically, I know Stan wants to ask about this as well. The Pat Fish song, Fine and Dandy.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's a wonderful track.
Just by the way, a very, very thoughtful and considered review. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Receptive. It was good. You know, well written. It's like, really like some of the points you made about it, and the positivity. It was great. I like that. Yeah, the Pat Fish song, I mean, it very much came up because there was obviously Pat died, and there was a tribute gig, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. And then kind of a song kind of came unbidden, really. I mean, I think Pat was someone that I spent a lot of quite intense time with, but also we weren't, you know, we wouldn't see each other for years on end as well, you know. But we did tours together. We played in Japan together. We did a tour of Germany together years ago. So there were some key moments in our lives. So it became a very powerful passing for me, I think, in many ways, even though it's not like it was a family member or anything like that. And then the song kind of just arrived, you know, and I just kind of thought, I have to write this now. It's really just kind of arrived without me even meaning to write it. And then it got written. And then I thought, oh, this is all right. This is good, you know. And then at the gig, it was fun to play. And I think hopefully it was very important for me. I mean, you don't consciously do things, but when I'd written it, I wanted the timbre of it to be right, because I wanted it to be a celebration of him. And this idea of him being, you know, because he was an incredibly positive individual, you know, and I wanted to kind of like show his eccentricities and his kind of probably typical Britishness in certain ways as well. So I kind of, you know, I wanted to represent him right. I didn't want to write anything sentimental or anything. I just wanted to write something that just maybe embodied him in a certain way, but also celebrated him in a certain way.
Yeah, it's wonderfully catchy, and not the type of thing that when you read it's a tribute song to Pat Fish, who died too young, you expect in your head a certain kind of song, and it's not that. It's still ringing in my head. That's probably my favorite track on the album. So I really appreciate that one. I think I will let Stan ask a couple of specific questions about creation, and well, one thing I'm gonna ask, just because we talked about it and Stan's got other questions, is the Weather Prophets are due for some kind of reissue, aren't they?
Yeah, Cherry Red keep asking. Yeah, it's just a time thing, really, of just trying to find the time to get it together to do that, basically. Okay. But yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because the Magpie Eyes is way out of print, and they did such a good job with the Loft reissue last year. It would be wonderful if that stuff came back in print. It really would.
No, I know Cherry Red want to do it. That'll
Yeah.
be fun doing that. It'll be fun. I mean, weirdly, I'm seeing Asheen, the guitarist in the Weather Prophets, at the weekend, who lives in Canada, and he's very
Oh.
rarely in England. So he's in England, so it'll be great seeing him down in Kent.
Great.
So, yeah.
Great. I'm going to turn it over to Stan for some more specifics there.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm not going to ask any more about Fine and Dandy, Pete. I think you kind of covered everything that I was going to ask about. And I will tell you, it's sort of interesting because I'm not sure if you've heard, the last Jazz Butcher record, but
Oh yeah,
it's really hard to listen to. I actually just got the redone version of Never Give Up, where it's more like him solo. And man, even after I thought I was over it from a year ago, it was like another gut punch. But that's, again, one of the reasons why I really liked your song, because it wasn't just another gut punch. Like you said, it was more of a celebration. So thank you for that. I was going to ask about the old Weather Prophets material. I mean, obviously, Glenn and I really enjoyed the Loft Ghost Trains and Country Lanes. It wasn't just to get an opportunity to re-listen to, some of our favorite songs, but what was really cool about that is there was a lot of rarities there that, again, I'm sure some of them weren't out, but some of them are really hard for us to get here.
yeah.
Are there going to be, when you said there's going to be a Weather Prophets reissue, are you going to have a set like that? I mean, I know the Weather Prophets released more material than the Loft, but is there going to be a release like that? And are there rarities that folks haven't heard yet from the Weather Prophets?
I think probably, yeah. I mean, it's in various boxes, and I don't really know. I need to just basically spend the time to try and find it all. Basically, it's like, I'm not a very good archivist of my own stuff. I don't throw loads of it away, although I have thrown plenty away. But I also, I don't have the copies of most of my records, stupidly, but yeah, I just need to dig it out. There is definitely stuff out there. Yeah, definitely. It's just try to think about how best to do it and stuff. Yeah. No, I think it's just however that kind of pans out. I was going to say about Pat's record. I'm absolutely aware of his album. It's phenomenal. It's an incredible record. What was interesting, for me, I have a kind of perspective on it that's quite close because Dave Morgan from the Weather Prophets, who's a good friend, played on it, of course. And he told me afterwards when Pat passed, it was a very strange time because Pat almost knew. It's in the songs that he knew, but it's a very strange, he had a strange sort of, situation leading up to it. And there was an illness he'd had before, and his friends intervened and took him to hospital, and he was denying that he was ill, and he was ill, and then they took him to hospital. And then I went to see him in London. This would have been, I guess, before lockdown. And then, but what Dave said is he was very aware of the fact that Pat seemed to be aware of some kind of mortality, and in quite a strong way. It was quite a, he didn't really go into details, but so that's another side of it, that it's in the record, but I think it was kind of evident to the people when they were making it. Dave's known him for a long time, but yeah.
That's interesting. And again, thinking about one of the positive things, and sorry, Glenn, for going out on a Pat Fish tangent here. But I'll tell you, one of the few bright spots sort of from the pandemic is the Pat was doing live shows from Fishy Mansions, and I'm assuming you caught one or two, maybe because of Fine and Dandy. Yeah. Man, those were incredible. As I said, I think I saw 3 or 4 of them. Wow, that was just something really special because, here in the States, I've still never had the opportunity to see you play live, Pete. And with Pat, I know he'd played here a couple of times, but I had only had the chance to see him once live here. So having that opportunity, that was pretty cool. Anyway. So Glenn, do you want me to ask my creation question, or did you want to ask yours? Or
yeah, okay. Go ahead.
So Pete, like Glenn and I were talking about, we both discovered, you and your music through a Creation Records compilation. And I'm not sure if you've covered this widely in other interviews, but can you talk a little bit about Alan McGee and your relationship with him during the early creation years. I think Glenn wanted to add to that about, do you feel like being on creation early on helped your career? Maybe I'm going to say that wrong, Glenn. Maybe you want to hop in there too.
The label, being labeled as a creation artist, was it a burden or a benefit?
No, I think it was an enormous help to us. I mean, I think it was a the word is I mean, it was basically, I mean, it's documented quite a lot in lots of different books as well. I mean, we were all, we were united in what we didn't like, basically, more than what we did like. We didn't, for example, I mean, it seemed to be everybody in creation was a massive fan of the Jam, and I couldn't stand the Jam at the time. I was not, I recognized it was good, but it was not my thing at all. So it wasn't. But we knew that we hated a kind of a sort of Thatcherite pop orthodoxy. That's what we didn't like. So that kind of united us in our outsiderness, really. No, and I mean, a relationship with Alan, I mean, we really, we basically went down to the first living room gig, which we saw in the NME, a tiny little thing that actually said it was a rough trade club, bizarre, which is a tiny little news thing. And we went down to it, and over there, I still live not far away from it where it first started. And it was just like kindred spirits. It just felt great to be there. And we just got on with Alan. I mean, I remember, I still see Alan. I saw Alan not long ago, went for a long walk, chatting about everything. I mean, it was funny because he was saying to me that he said I was the poshest person he'd ever met. Because he came from Glasgow. I mean, his childhood and youth in Glasgow, I mean, when he moved to London with Andrew, they slept on the roof of Covent Garden Tube Station for 10 days. That's how they were homeless. I mean, I like the idea that you can still sleep on the roof of Covent Garden Tube Station. Obviously, that wouldn't happen now, but
right.
But I think it was the summer. But he was, he had a very tough upbringing, and he said when he met me, he couldn't believe. I mean, obviously, I'm not particularly posh, but I'm not Scottish. Do you know what I mean? I don't come from Paisley. So I think to him, I felt like a total alien. And it was a very sweet thing because he went, and he obviously immediately, I think he kind of took against me. And then he sort of said to me recently, that's he realized how much he liked me, because even though on the surface I was like an annoying Englishman, posh Englishman, but actually I was very cool. It was a real compliment. I mean, in the sense that,
right.
Normally people with my accent would patronize someone like him or be kind of quite, put downy. And obviously the fact I wasn't, but of course the moment he heard my voice, he was like, oh my God, you're another one of those posh English people. But it was nice. It was very encouraging that he was like, no, of course you're not, So I got on incredibly well with him and all the Scottish people on the label. But so that was what I remember him telling me recently about it, which is kind of nice. I mean? We were able to kind of go beyond our kind of backgrounds, which I think we all know the English class system is a very big thing. And I mean, my class is, I mean, Christ, God forbid. I mean, I'm certainly not upper class, but I mean, probably I'm not, I didn't leave school at 16 and work in a factory. No. Do you know what I mean? So there's still a different, I come from the home counties. I come from London, and the home counties are typical sort of lower / upper middle class English person, which is, probably a slightly different world. So yeah, I mean, the other thing that I always remember the Prime was saying to me, which I really enjoyed as well, was they were saying, well, they also, two things they said, I don't want to say, so this is, they said, we've never seen anyone do that when they say something. And also that I sounded like someone in the Rolling Stones, because I have got that kind of classless English accent, because I think they're much more proud of their Scottish, but I think in those days they were like, we don't even want to sound Scottish. We want to sound like, we want to sound like the Rolling Stones, and of course I've got that. I'm sure but this is such in England, there's, my accent is the typical, I don't know, whatever you call it, London semi-estuary, like it's the accent that, people like Sid, people that they would look up to, 60s rock stars would have. Right. Do you know what I mean? Big deal, right. But I think that always made me laugh. And
the thing that I always liked about the early years for us of getting into creation was the fact that everyone seemed to be taking a little bit of inspiration from the 60s and the cool stuff in the 60s, not necessarily just the obvious psychedelic bands or the Beatles or whatever. They were taking inspiration from things that maybe had fallen off, were not quite in favor at the time. You know, if somebody like Alan McGee referenced something about the Byrds, he wouldn't reference the obvious points. He would reference something more obscure later in the 60s, more country flavored, for example, and you'd have to go out and seek it. And I really like that. And I think in that sense, everybody on Creation in the pre-Oasis years were ahead of the curve. They were really diving into something that at the moment wasn't in fashion again. And then gradually, I think that started to spread outward, and there was more of a 60s sound in a lot of bands. In the West Coast of America, you had the Paisley Underground, of course. So it was sort of happening there too, in a different way. But there was also a big emphasis on songwriting. And I would say before shoegaze or whatever you want to call it, there was a real premium. The bands on Creation, everyone was a good songwriter. The material was top notch, really. And I don't know if that's unique to Alan McGee's outlook or the way he cultivated talent.
I think it was, I mean, I think it was just what mattered to us. I mean, it still matters to me, you know, it's that thing, but I think I mean, I remember when we were at Nebworth, when Oasis played at Nebworth, and it was a funny event because I was in the VIP area with Alan, and we were both going, he was going, what the fuck am I doing here? This is insane. Very sweet. I mean, it was, you know, you would have thought it would have been like, yeah, I'm the big I am, but he was not. He was just going, what are we doing in the VIP area? It's like, well, I was saying to him, you fucking paid for all of this. Like, your band paid for it. But anyway, but there was that. But I remember watching a bit of Oasis at the show, and I kind of thought, wow, this is on some level, this is our fault. You know, they're just standing there playing their songs.
Right.
I love Oasis, but I mean, what's interesting is that kind of became the norm, and it's sort of indie music was the norm. That thing of playing songs, singing them, standing there. I mean, you know, I was never the world's biggest Led Zeppelin, you know, but Led Zeppelin, when they played Networth, you know, they got their shirts off and they swung the microphones around and performed. Oasis just stood there, just like the Loft did, or just like the Servants did, or just like anyone did at the living room. So I it's quite an interesting thing that what was quite unusual in 1984 or 5 became almost the norm in 1991 or 92, which I think which is saying what you're saying in terms of being ahead of the curve. It became the normal, basically, to do that kind of music, you know.
I'm going to throw it back to Stan, but since you mentioned the Servants, I'll ask one quick one. So I've seen you do live streams with Luke Haynes. Any chance you two would do a record together?
With Luke?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. He's got a young kid, so he's a bit busy. So he's doing that.
He is busy.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I'd love to do a record with him. I mean, I'm also really good friends with David Westlake as well. So, you know, so now I know he's got a new record, which he works very slowly. So I don't know quite where he is with it. But
yeah, because Luke wasn't an original member of the Servants. He joined in the second or the later, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, because
another run.
When the Auteurs came out, there was a lot of references to the Servants, but it really wasn't his project. It was Westlake's project, you know.
Yeah, completely. Yeah,
right. And Luke has certainly kept busy, and he's done a lot of interesting material. And I don't want to get off on. I'm a big fan. I've seen the Auteurs a few times. I've seen Black Box Recorder my first night in London, so I'm a hardcore fan. I'd love to see that. I'll let Stan go back to his line of questioning there with Creation.
Hey, Pete. So in '93, you released the Masterpiece solo album, Got Another Stories on Danceteria, and, you know, the equally great Disco Light single. By the way, I'll do a little segue there. Gosh, those things were hard to find. To try to get those on disc.
I don't own a copy of the album myself. So
oh my gosh. I remember it was like treasure hunts. And you also released a lot of other great stuff like Wisdom of Harry. I mean, I'll still say that I'm Gonna Make My Life Right is one of the finest songs you've ever written. I still listen to it all the time. But those recordings aren't currently available on streaming platforms. Will they ever be available on streaming platforms? And then also, what is your take on streaming platforms? I know a lot of indie artists that I've had the pleasure of meeting through Facebook, like yourself. have fairly negative opinions on it. I kind of understand how the pay scale works with things like Spotify, and I know it's not very obviously generous. But so the two-part question is, some of those, you know, masterpieces that aren't on streaming platforms, will they ever be? And then two, what do you think of streaming platforms in general?
I mean, it's just a time issue. I mean, I tend to sort of always be looking forward rather than, you know, so I need to spend more time husbanding it. I mean, I own the rights to God and Other Stories. I just need to buy a copy of it again, scan the artwork and put it on Spotify. I mean, it's my call. Do you know what I mean? I can do that. I mean, the only thing is I think it might be nice to reissue it and then put it on Spotify. So I need to find, I mean, the Wisdom Harry stuff, I think is still up there because it was on Matador. And the Ellis Island stuff's on Heavenly, so that's still there, I think.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I mean, I've looked through on Spotify. Maybe it's one of those things that they
Wisdom
missed.
of Harry's on Spotify, but on the God and Other Story stuff, there's some tracks off it on on my page, the compilation that I did.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Injury
Cool.
Time. Yeah.
I'll definitely go back. Yeah, I do.
There's a compilation called Injury Time
Right.
on my page.
I do remember that, yeah.
Streaming platforms. I mean, for me, I kind of I think music was always the career of being a musician until maybe this sort of weird sort of, well, this glitch when people actually paid for recorded music between about, you know, I don't know, 1940 something and, you know, about 4 years ago. It's like, that was the glitch. I mean, the normal thing was, you know, when people would play folk songs, you'd be a blacksmith and then you'd play folk songs and you wouldn't expect particularly to get paid an awful lot for it. I mean, to me, it's like, I can't get really angry about streaming platforms because the world changes and you have to adapt to the world. And the one thing that's certain is that everything's going to change. And I mean, you know, streaming is a byproduct of the digital universe. It's a little bit like raging against the internet. I mean, it's like, well, it's there. What you have to do is make it work for you as best you can. Streaming, of course, it's changed the musical universe massively because it's flattened everything out. You know, everything's available, isn't it? And you know what we spoke about, but you know, it's also, I can't help but see the good sides of it. I mean, we all grew up on music. I think we're similar in that, where we read about music before we heard it, which is kind of strange. Whereas actually in the world of Spotify, actually it's not true. You read about someone and you listen to them straight away, and then you make your own mind up. So maybe that works better. I mean, I can't honestly get that angry about the fact the world changes. The world changes, and that's how it is, you know. I mean, it's like, you know, I'm not interested in. It's like I'm not, you know, like whenever any of my contemporaries, which causes me enormous pain, says that music's not as good as it used to be. I'm just like, what are you talking about? I cannot believe that you are saying what we would look at people years ago and just go, oh no, they're saying it wasn't as good as it was whenever, you know. I mean, it's like, no, I think music's as good as it ever was. There's always good stuff around. I mean, these go in phases. Obviously, you have different tastes. And I think with streaming platforms, I think it's not great, but the model changes. You know, I mean, the model changed in the way where, you know, I mean, I benefited from lots of my adult life from making money out of music, which wasn't really concomitant with how many records I sold, because people thought I was going to sell records. So they gave me money, which I didn't have to pay them back. So that was the glitch that worked for me, you know. So I'm you know what I mean? I'm not angry about that at all.
By the way, Pete, I'll tell you just a little side note. I think you have two people here that agree with you about the music's not necessarily better in the past than it is today. I mean, I constantly focus on what's new. Then I'll have my nostalgia nights, you know, where I'm sitting outside by a fire, having a few beers and a cigar and listening to old stuff too. But no, I mean, Glenn, I'm sure maybe Glenn might want to take a step back and tell him about your site and where you do the reviews. I know he read it, but did you want to tell him a little bit about, you know, A Pessimist Is Never Disappointed?
Yeah, I started it in 2007. I think one of the first things I posted was a 1-paragraph review of my first Morrissey concert in DC. And given Morrissey's current politics, it's unlikely I'm probably going to see him again. But yeah. So that was one of the first things. And then I focused a lot on Hong Kong movies because I was a fan and I got into the 60s stuff. And if you know the Shaw Brothers Studios, there's about 120 reviews up there that I did when they were being reissued. Then I moved to Hong Kong. And around that time, I started doing more music because I was able to get things in advance of bands I liked, and usually things that would have taken a lot of work to find in physical form. And I was overseas, so that helped too. I could review stuff, didn't have to worry about finding it. So I've tried to be enthusiastic, and I really do not like to run negative reviews. So I try to find something positive about the things that I review. And if I really hate it, I'll just ignore it, you know. But Stan and I have been friends for 35 years, and it's around the same time that we both got CD players and got Flowers in the Sky in DC, probably for $30 a piece, which was a lot then for a CD, that we've been fans. And that's kind of the one thing that's interesting is that I don't know if people take it for granted that there were remarkably few people that knew these bands. And in 1988, I could count on one hand the people that knew Creation Records. And one of them was Stan, one of them was me, and the other three were people I knew that ended up forming Velocity Girl and Slumberland Records. So Mike Schulman, who's put out some of your music as well here in the US. So you have this sense that I don't think kids on Spotify necessarily get. There's a plus that they get the music and it's right there. But in my mind, I have very fond memories of where I bought those albums, who I knew that I talked about the albums with then. And, you know, there's a little bit of nostalgia there, but it makes it almost more special in a way that you have that memory, effort, you know.
But I think also there's always an interesting underground. You know, I've got ex-students of mine who I bump into, and they're doing stuff which is just strange and interesting and underground and is not available on Spotify, actually. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of through the world of NTS. I don't know if you know NTS, the digital radio station in London.
Right.
You know, it's through NTS and it's sort of through Bandcamp, and you know, the way the Bandcamp's become like a sort of an alternative platform. I mean, notwithstanding who's just bought it, I can't remember who's bought it, but anyway,
Sony
so I think that those undergrounds still exist. I mean, they exist in a way that maybe it's morphed and changed, behaves slightly differently, but it still exists. I think it's about making it, you know, I don't know. I mean, like my Spotify, I try and avoid playlists if I possibly can, unless they're from people that I know. Right. I'll avoid, or I'll tend to make a point of listening to albums and try and make it my, you know, I mean, try and make Spotify just at least in some sense mirror my music fandom, rather than getting sort of buried in the algorithms of Spotify where they're endlessly repeating certain key tracks and all that stuff, which is very tedious and you know, uninteresting. So I think there's ways around everything, you know.
Can you talk? I'll turn it back to Stan in a second, but can you talk a little bit about your professional career, your teaching about music?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very lucky to be able to do that, really. I mean, it kind of came up about 15, 20 years ago. And I mean, I pursued it as well. I mean, it went into fall into, I mean, I guess it was something I really wanted to do. It was a challenge. And I think it's a really, it's just a really nice thing to do, to be able to interact with like 20-year-olds making music. It's really grounding, and it's really good for I think it's really good for my music practice as well. You know, to be involved with the creative practices of young people is just an amazing thing, because you also realize that, you know, it makes my world so much bigger, because sometimes my world, if I think of my contemporaries, of course, is relatively small. But what's lovely is we're talking to the people at college is that almost invariably they're like, you know, they haven't got a clue who my heroes are, and that's fine. And that's great, because it makes you realize there are lots of different cultures and lots of different music cultures and worlds, all of which people are as passionate about that as I am about, I don't know what, you know, it's the same passion, but it's just different things, which I think is very grounding very, very good thing to do. And I really enjoy it. It's a really, as I say, grounding thing to do. And I had a friend, actually an ex-student who's a friend, a guy called DC Gore, who does really good records on Domino. He's on Domino.
Right.
He used to be in a group called Little Cub, was his group. He's a great songwriter, and I used to teach him. And he was telling me that apparently it's a thing in, what's that sport that Conor McGregor does and all those people do?
Yeah.
I don't know what it's
The
called.
cage match. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a name. It's
Martial
not WWMB. It's not an acronym, isn't it? But I can't remember. And but he was saying that apparently one of the givens in that world is that you need to have a gym and be teaching people. It's considered to be quite bad. And even in ancient Japanese fighting culture as well, it's considered you need to be teaching as well as doing.
Right.
And I kind of really like the fact that I'm there with Conor McGregor. I like the fact that the idea of teaching as well as actually doing. I think it's a very spiritually and creatively important thing to do. I think it's helped me in my music a lot.
I think Conor McGregor, like you, is also considered very posh. So you guys have. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, I won't show you my chest tattoo.
Hey, Glenn, I only have one more. Do you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay, so in 2011, Pete, you released Songbox, fine album in its own right, but I was really intrigued by the extra covers you included, a bunch of indie artists covering your songs that were on a Songbox. I especially like the Let's Wrestle and Comic Game covers. A buddy told me that you have a family connection to Let's Wrestle. But so are those bands like your current favorite indie acts, or what kind of current indie type music are you listening to nowadays?
It's just people I mean, it's as you can see, I'm doing the song swap thing on what I'm doing now. So it's just people I know. I've got Emma Tricker doing one. I've got various, but it just seems like a very natural thing to do. I'm friends with Gina from the Raincoats. She's doing art at the moment. She's doing a lot of painting, so she didn't have time to do one for this. Gina and Anna. So it's just people So it just kind of seems like a nice, and I think the song swap I really enjoy. Like Katina Rewires are going to be doing one very soon. So I've done one of their songs and they've done Miracle on the High Street. So yeah, it's just a nice thing to do. I was also, I have to say, rather pleased. Shouldn't have been that pleased, but somebody on one of the live streams was telling me mentioned that they'd never paid so much money for a CD as they paid for Songbox, which always makes me kind of happy that it's that hard to get. And it's, I always like that as a record nerd. Do you know what I mean? It's something, or a music nerd. It's nice to know that your product is rare and valuable.
That's sort of the weird thing, though, Pete. It's like Glenn and I talk about this all the time. Back in the '80s, I mean, when I first heard you, I think I was like 17 or 18. And back then, for paying import prices, we're paying like $30 for CDs. We didn't have that kind of money. So it's like literally like, I think 90% of the money I had, I spent on music. And that's what's weird now, being 53, making a decent living, and then having these streaming platforms like Spotify and things where it's like, I'm not really paying very much to listen to music. So I think in response to that, I don't know if Glenn's doing this. I know my friend Glenn's other collaborator, Jay, we both started buying vinyl. I'd gotten rid of all of my physical stuff years ago, but now we're buying vinyl and I'm purposely picking artists that I want to give money to, and that's who I'm going to buy the record from.
I think also the thing that's important with music, I mean, there's a brilliant piece that I read years ago about, Harry Smith's Anthology of American Folk Music. That very famous.
I think so, yeah.
Do you know Harry Smith?
I think so, yeah.
The guy that he made this anthology called the Anthology of American Folk Music, which was this incredible sort of pan-ethnic, sort of extraordinary collection of weird records, which he compiled for Folkways in the early 50s. And it was endlessly influential on particularly on Dylan, but all sorts of people. The old weird America. Greil Marcus has even written a book about it. But what I love is the article. What was interesting, this was saying that basically, apparently, the actual sales of it were almost non-existent. Yeah, its influence was huge.
Right.
And I think sometimes with music, and that's what I sort of think of, I think sometimes it's about depth, not breadth. You know, and it's almost better to have a small amount of people liking what you do a hell of a lot, rather than having a lot of people liking what you do a little bit when they're doing the washing up. I mean, and I think that's a little bit, you can go into the Spotify thing with that, there's a lot of music on Spotify that has, you know, eye-watering amounts of streams, but actually will disappear in a way that, because it doesn't have the depth of the love for it. I don't think that's a sentimental thing. I mean, it fits the Velvet Underground, famous Velvet Underground paradigm. It's like nobody saw them, but the people that did all form bands. It's like, I think sometimes depth is quite important, that, you know, that I notice in my long time in music. You know, there was lots of people that were around when I was around who in numbers sold an awful lot of records. I don't think anybody's bothering to interview now and ask any questions of, you know, because I think that's about breadth. You know, they reached a lot of people, but actually they didn't reach them in a way that maybe stuck, you know, went to their hearts. So I think that's the other way to think about music. You know, I think it's like it's the depth of people's engagement with it.
See,
That's a great comment.
I think, you know, I'm a little bit different than Stan in my approach now. Is there's a lot of things like the Flowers in the Sky I got back a few years ago on CD, because it's a tangible thing I want to have again. And, you know, you have memories associated with the object almost. And then there are things that I either never saw or couldn't afford when I was in college, and now I want it, you know, like Danielle Dax, if you remember Danielle Dax.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only knew one or two things, and you know, now you have Discogs and you can find all the stuff that I could never afford at Tower when I was a young man. Mm-hmm. But then you also have the Bandcamp thing, which I am happy to pay to support artists on Bandcamp, and I love it. And the problem with that is you start piling up, you know, metaphorically piling up stuff that you never get to, and it's hard for me to go back to stuff I bought a year ago on Bandcamp when there's new things coming out. But yeah, you have that pleasure of supporting. You really do have that pleasure of paying and getting it, and you know the money's going directly to the artist. And I love that. I love that about Bandcamp. I really do.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I mean, it's like the thing that people said about John Peel, which was that he was always more interested in the music he hadn't heard than the music he had heard.
Right.
Which I thought, right, you know.
Always looking for the next thing that was going to fire his, yeah. Well, Pete, we want to thank you very much for doing this today. Pleasure. This is a real pleasure. And I recorded it as Zoom does. If I can figure out a way to parse this out into a smaller segments, I might put it on YouTube if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Totally.
Yeah. This is the first time I've recorded via video any interview I've done. I usually do them on phone or email. So this would be a new one. This would be a new one if I did Zoom correctly and it worked. So
yeah, I think if you can, you just have to download it and just put it in any number of your, you know, you just chop it up, dead easy. I think.
What's next now after this album? What's next?
I think basically the Attendant has a record ready to go, basically, which we're not finished, but we've got an album's worth of songs. So I think I'm going to work on that. I'm just really enjoying having made this and sort of doing. I'm going to do some more shows. What I really want to work towards doing in terms of playing live is doing more house shows, which seems to work really well. The ones that I've done, because it fits my sort of. It fits the audience size. It fits the whole model seems to work really well. So I'm going to be doing some more of those. And just singing and playing basically. But I mean, the house show idea, what worked, I played some show in France, which worked great recently, where basically I did 2 sets, and one set was based on requests and one set was based on new songs that I chose. And I kind of really like the idea of doing house shows. If I ever get to America, I'll do a bunch of house shows where they're kind of 50-50. It's 2 sets. Second set is the request set, and then the first set is. I think that's a really nice way to do it. It's kind of like, you know, so you get to sort of play, and you know, you also get to sort of involve the audience in a certain sense in terms of what they want to hear as well.
Do you remember all the old ones, Pete, or do you have to wait till you get the requests and go work on them or go practice them?
It depends. It depends. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like. Sometimes I'm absolutely baffled and I can't figure it out. I mean, there's a track, The Loft, when we reformed that I wrote, And we still don't know what one of the chords is, and I can't remember what it is. Nobody can figure out what it is. So no, I mean, it takes a while. Yeah, it does. Sometimes I'm like, what? I have no clue what I did sometimes, and I have to ask someone else to work it out for me.
So Pete, if you do make it over here, I'll give you some advanced warning. I'm gonna be asking for "I'm Gonna Make My Life Right," the Wisdom of Harry song. So
that's good. No, that's one that you're not alone. I'm very proud of that song. Thank you. I'm glad you like that. I'm glad you like that. I did play that in America. I played it, yeah.
Big Dumb Song also. Big Dumb Song would be a good one.
I need to buy the record. I know how it goes vaguely, but yeah.
I would tell you I'd send it to you, but like I said, I got rid of all the physical stuff like years ago.
Yeah. No, I need to get it. You're right. It's a good thought. I'm gonna look at that. I'm gonna look at getting that. Yeah. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Pete. We really appreciate this. This has been a lot of fun.
Just give us any links and stuff like that, and I'll share and everything. All good.
Great. Thank you very much.
Cool.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.
All right.